Hello guys, we are back in new fanfic, and if enjoying this then please share and like part 2. Now let's start the fanfic. Yup, I'm the guy they brought to take out that Ninja Turtle problem you seem to have. Well, in complete honesty, we just crashed into each other and I told them about how strong I was and they took me here to help. Stated Naruto like he was talking about the weather. BB nut, you're no older than I am. And you're shorter than, Crash. If one were to look for Chojuro at this moment, they would find him head stuck in the ground with his body perfectly straight in a vertical position. Or as Naruto was describing it, like an ostrich preparing to be penetrated by a prisoner. Of course, no one there knew what an ostrich was, so they merely chalked it up to his insanity. Look, if you don't believe us, then you can just ask Mei-chan to test him using whatever soldiers she wants. Though I can't guarantee they will leave with all their limbs. Or their lives for that matter. You know what, just tell her that if she has any prisoners to just have them fight Naruto for their freedom. At least that way we can somewhat gauge his strength and Naruto will be able to calm his hunger for battle. Said Zabuza with a sweat drop at the end. Naruto called fighting Oring as sating his hunger, or in some occasions feeding it. Yay, Naruto was ed up in the head, but what would you expect with all the shit he had to put up with thanks to the villagers? At least he was only insane when he was hungry. Back in Konoha he was hardly ever hungry. After all, ever since he started becoming the Juubi, there had been disappearances that would only end up going cold due to there being a lack of evidence. Since the only evidence left behind would be a small pool of blood that would belong to those that disappeared. The villagers blamed the demon brat for these so-called disappearances. Oh, they didn't know just how right they were. Of course they had no proof, but they were still right in the end. They just had one thing mixed up. These weren't disappearances, oh no, these were hunts. In order to prevent Naruto from going completely batshit insane, Yuki separated most of his madness and fused to part of the dark Naruto and formed a new entity altogether. He called himself Okami. He looked exactly like 5-year-old Naruto did, except for a few differences. The first difference were the number of tails. Depending on how many Naruto currently had would be the number that Okami would have. And instead of his hair, fur, and eye color being silver, they were pitch black. Also, his voice was deeper than one would that a child would speak in. He was wearing nothing on his upper body except for the gauntlets on his arms that were surrounded with strange red metal chains. He wore loose-fitting black pants that went inside his matching black boots that were covered by the same chains. Just look up Menma and that's basically what he looks like with the extra appendages. He and Naruto got along fabulously. If Okami were to go into a shadow clone, then one would think they were brothers. They already called each other brothers, so it would make no difference to them. So whenever they were feeling hungry, then Naruto would just let Okami take control of his body. He could take back control whenever he wanted, but normally he just let Okami have his fun before returning back into his mind. Most of the time when he's noting, he's just sleeping or talking to Naruto. Which is what was going on right now. So what else do you think we should do that's completely batshit insane and incredibly funny? Thought Naruto. Depends. Do you give a damn about the consequences? Asked Okami. Please, these guys can't even touch me, so no. Replied Naruto with a chuckle. Then give me quick control, trust me, you'll thank me for this later, hopefully. Responded Okami with a perverted grin on his face. Wait, what are you? Too late now, sit back and watch the show. Now with Okami in control, he walked over towards Haku with a grin on his face and his eyes overshadowed by his face while giggling uncontrollably. With each step he took, Naruto was yelling at him to tell him what he was going to do. If only he knew, then he would high-five the man in the face with a chair made from adamantium repeatedly. And then he would proceed to thank him days later. Cough. I believe it's time for us to take you to out leader so that she might your strengths and weaknesses. Said the elderly nin with a slight blush on his face while mumbling something that sounded like, back in my day, under his breath. So Naruto created a couple shadow clones to carry Zabuza and they started their trek towards the leader of the resistance. Mindscape of one Naruto, one Okami, and one Yuki. What the was that about Okami? Zabuza nearly'd me and once he wakes up he's really gonna try to me. Yelled out Naruto in a somewhat understandable rage. Yuki was currently applauding Okami for his initiative in getting her first harem sister. She had a feeling she knew who the other two sisters would be, but she had no idea who the fifth sister would be. Hey, you should be thanking me. I just helped you figure out just how pervy Haku-chan is and that she apparently gets off on having you be the dominant one in the bed. Hell, she might even like doing it in public more than anywhere else. You're ing welcomehole. Yelled out Okami, who was pissed off that Naruto was being so ungrateful. It's not like he just helped him out or anything. Whatever, I'm going back outside and hopefully survive Zabuza's wrath once he wakes up. I may be a god, but a father's wrath is nothing to joke about. Said Naruto with a shudder. With that, he left two grinning beings to be outside and hopefully prepare for Zabuza's attack. I sure am going to miss this once I'm gone. I just hope he can get past it without too much trouble. Stated Okami with a not so subtle bit of foreshadow. Don't worry, we'll get him past it. Just don't go easy on him once that day comes, because he'd hate you for doing that. Replied Yuki in a soothing tone. She knew Naruto wouldn't take this well, but she and Haku and maybe another harem sister would have to get him through it. Outside the mindscape, the walk was rather peaceful and Naruto was unable to sense anyone else nearby, so they were effectively alone. Which was a good thing for what Haku was about to do. Naruto just couldn't get a break, but it's not like he would really complain about what. Haku had woken up moments later and found that she was unable to use her legs at all. So Naruto, being the gentleman he is, decided to help her get dressed. Of course he, accidentally, rubbed her most sensitive parts as a form of teasing, which earned him a smack to the back of the head and a blush on Haku's face. Luckily for them, Naruto's clones had popped, sending Naruto their memories. Apparently they had made camp, seeing as how the headquarters of the resistance was still another few hours run at their current speed, and since it was getting late, setting up camp seemed like the wisest decision. Another good thing was that Zabuza hadn't woken up yet and was placed inside his respective tent while the now identified Ao and Chojuro were taking the first shift. Naruto then picked up Haku in his arms, which caused her to release a very cute eep sound and then flash into their shared tent. Once they got there, Naruto laid Haku down and laid down behind her in a spooning position while wrapping his arms around her in a protective manner. Good night, my Kuroyuki Hime. Sleep well knowing that I am by your side. Said Naruto in a loving tone as he held one of the loves of his life. Good night, Naru Koi, know that I too am by yours. Always and forever. Stated Haku with a loving smile as she started falling asleep to the rhythm of his heart. And with that they slept until it came time for their shift. A few hours later. Hey brats, wake up, it's time for your shift. No, get up so we can get some sleep. Said Ao as he waited for the two lovers to get out of their shared tent and begin their watch over the temporary camp. It's a good thing Naruto had used up most of his strength earlier in having with Haku ending those 3 bandit camps, coupled with staying awake for almost a week straight, or else he would have had a hand sticking out of his back for disturbing their cuddle time. Alright, just give us a minute, yawned out the slightly tired Naruto. He then got dressed along with Baku, who he quickly healed using some of his chakra so they wouldn't notice her limp. The last thing they needed was Zabuza somehow finding out about their little escapade earlier. Once they were dressed, they stepped out of their tents and sat down on a random tree close by. Naruto then formed around 50 shadow clones to watch the camp while he and Haku enjoyed their alone time. Hey Naru Koi, would it be okay if you told me about your past? I mean, we just had a few hours ago and we know next to nothing about each other. Don't get me wrong, I do love you, but I want to know more about the man I love. Asked Haku, noticing the small flinch Naruto gave when she asked about his past. Alright, but you may want to get comfortable because my tale is a long one and you might not love me like you do now afterwards. Said Naruto with a downcast expression on his face. Naru Koi, there is nothing in your past that could stop me from loving you. I am yours and you are mine. stated Haku with a serious expression on her face before she brought her face closer to his for a quick kiss. So then Naruto told her everything about his life in Konoha, about Yuki, about him being a god, about Okami, and about his harem. He expected for Haku to hit him or yell at him. Even move away in fear of him he would have understood, but what she did not only shocked him but showed just how much she really loved him. She pulled him in for a passionate kiss and he could taste the salt from the tears that were falling down her face and onto her lips. When they pulled away, Haku put her head on his chest and started crying. "You idiot. I could never hate you for what happened to you. I could never hate you for such a stupid reason, and I could never hate you for what you are. Because I love you Naruto, and I always will for the rest of my life," yelled Haku in between her sobs. His life was so much like hers, but yet at the same time it was so much worse. Ignored by the ones you loved and hated by the ones you would be expected to protect for something out of your control. After she calmed down a little bit thanks to warm beat of his heart and the gentle rubbing on her back, she kissed him one more time before finishing. "I don't care if I have to share you Naruto, because I know that what I feel for you is real and I know that what you feel for me is real. So please get it through that thick head of yours that I won't abandon you no matter what you do. I will always stand by, even if the whole world is against us. I will always be with you. That is my Nindo," said a now calmer Haku with a few stray tears that were wiped away just before Naruto closed the distance between their lips for a passionate kiss that lasted a couple minutes. "Thank you Haku Haim, you have no idea how happy this makes. I am literally the luckiest man alive because of you and Yuki Haim," said Naruto once they broke apart as he briefly dropped his special henge, showing her what he really looked like. As silver met brown, she couldn't help but get lost in his beautiful silver eyes. He hand went up to feel his face to make sure this was real and not a dream. "You're so handsome," she said in an almost trance-like tone. One of the reasons for this could have been that the hormones his body naturally secretes was slightly affecting her view of him, and since they had a little bit of fun time earlier, she was even more vulnerable to such hormones. The hormones are unable to change her feelings, but rather they enhance them to a stronger point. This of course does not make her a fangirl, it simply makes her more loving towards him. He. If you're done stripping me with your eyes, then I guess it's time for you to tell your story of the past," said Naruto, eliciting an eep from his companion. "All right, but could you hold me while I speak? It may not be as bad as yours, but it's still hard to talk about," replied Haku with a depressed look on her face along with a few stray tears leaking out of her eyes. She then proceeded to explain to him what happened to her when she found out about her bloodline limit. What her father did to her because of his fear of her powers. How her kind was treated simply because of what they could do. At this point she was crying into his chest, doing her best to continue. When she finally calmed down, she told him about how she was found by Zabuza as he taught her how to use her bloodline after him seeing a few Hyouden users before the war had started. He showed her something that she thought she would never experience again. The love of a father. She first started out thinking that she would be nothing but a tool, but started to truly believe that what he said was true. That he saw her as his daughter and that from then on he was her father. So for all rights and purposes she wasn't Haku Yuki. No, she was Haku Momochi, daughter of Zabuza Momochi, the demon of the mist and one of the 7 swordsmen of the mist. Throughout her story, Naruto was releasing huge amounts of ki and was really looking forward to finding this father of hers and slowly rip out his intestines as the man watched himself slowly die before being healed and having the process repeated for who knows how many times before finally burning the man from the inside out. Luckily for the man, he was already ED by Haku in self-defense. However, when he saw her start to break down, his rage subsided and decided that comforting her was more important than his rage. So he comforted her, hoping to help her feel better. When she continued and told him about how Zabuza saved her from herself, he felt his respect for the man rise by leaps and bounds. The man was definitely more than met the eye. "Kuroyuki Haim, I swear to you now that I will show Yagura and his men no mercy. I will make them rue the day they dared mess with one of my Haims," They will wish they met with Yami instead of me, they will wish that the Shinigami was after their souls rather than myself after their very existence. I will make them rue the day they decided to mess with the ones I love and erase them from every plane of existence. Yelled out Naruto as he swore to right the wrong that was done to Haku and all of Kiri because of their Mizukage. And I swear to you Narukoi that I will be there to help you bring Konoha to its knees for the wrongdoings that they have done to you. We will freeze their hearts and shatter them with a touch. We will show them what happens when you with a Hyouten user and her husband. They better prepare because winter is coming. Spoke out Haku as she subconsciously froze the area around them in her anger. Yuki was getting so turned on by their anger and power that she had to relieve herself inside one of the private areas of the mindscape that belonged to her. Yup, when she finally got her turn with Naruto, she wanted it to be an orgy. After all, the more the merrier. Throughout the entire conversation, Zabuza had woken up and heard them talking. When he heard about Naruto's childhood, he felt his respect for the boy grow as well as his hatred for Konoha. When he saw him comforting Haku when she was crying instead of trying to take advantage of her, and when he heard what he swore to her, he decided that he could trust him with his little girl. But if he hurt her, then there would be blood to shed. He then decided to go back to sleep in order to give them some space. Once Naruto felt that Zabuza was gone, which happened to be right as Haku's speech to him ended, he passionately kissed Haku and they spent the rest of their shift make out with one another along with some harmless groping. Konoha. Day of public executions. The day for the civilian council's execution was delayed by a few days while they searched for Danzo. They had yet to find the man himself but had successfully destroyed his main base beneath Konoha and 4 other root bases that held a grand total of 4,000 root soldiers. While most of them were forced to beat, they were able to capture a few operatives. One of which was Torun Aburame, who was thought to have died at childbirth and buried in the Aburame private graveyard. He was currently sitting in a cell that was guarded by fellow Aburame who controlled the same insects as him so that his attacks would be proven ineffective against them if he got past the chakra ceiling seals on the walls of his cell. Normally it would be on his body, but due to his insects it was best to put the seals on the wall. Anyway, the ex-council members were being escorted by 2 Anbu operatives towards the cage tower. Every other villager that wasn't on a mission or dead were surrounding the tower in preparation for the execution. Once the ex-council members arrived, most of the village began cheering for them and calling them heroes for banishing the demon from Konoha. Silence, you worthless scum, yelled out the last person the villagers thought would ever call them that. Their own Kage, the one they idolized as a hero among heroes. And here he was calling them scum. It was incomprehensible to them. You fools called my own son a demon and beat him for crimes that were not his own. He had done no wrong to you, yet you foolishly let your hatred consume you. This is not the will of fire that I believed in as I fought for my village in the war. You all doubted my abilities in sealing the beast's chakra when it concerned my son, but when it concerned my daughter you thought there were no flaws. So as of this moment Konoha is going to become what it was before Nadaime-sama created the civilian council, a military dictatorship. You civilians will have no say in politics since you do not deserve it. Yelled out Minato as some of his pent-up rage was released. There was no way for him to rid himself of it all until Danzo was dead at his feet, paying for his crimes with his life. As the villagers realized what they were hearing, a majority of them had fear etched on their face because without the civilian council to protect them there was nothing stopping them from their executions. Though they still held some hope that the Kage in his rage would overlook that small detail. Oh, and if any of you are thinking that I would forget about your crimes against my son, then you are sorely mistaken. However, if I were to all those who tried to my son, then Konoha would lose most of its citizens, so I have an alternative. Stated Minato in a voice that was a little too sweet and a smile that was a little too innocent for this to be much better. However, the villagers started thinking that they would get off easy, however their hopes were shattered in seconds once he finished speaking. The alternative will be for you to have your mind searched by a Yamanaka, and then if you have done anything against my son, then you will receive the same injuries that you have inflicted on him by either Ibiki or Anko, and just before you die from your wounds you will be healed by Tsunade, so that the process can be repeated over again until you have felt every single injury that you have inflicted on my son. Yelled out Minato with a smirk as he saw their hopes get crushed by his statement. He then gave the signal for the executions to start. The council members deserved a special execution, so he decided that there was nothing more special than having your soul eaten by the Shinigami, only to endure the rest of time and space in agony and misery. How was he able to do this without forcing them to summon the Shinigami themselves? Simple. On a scroll placed in front of them, he drew a seal for the summoning of the Shinigami, but changed it so that the Shinigami would only devour the ones that had a specific seal already placed on them, which the ex-council members so happened to have on them instead of chakra sealing seals. There was panic amongst the crowds when they saw the Shinigami devour the souls of their beloved council. Many fainted while others threw up their lunch, while others still lost all control of their bowels. But all of them knew that they were ed for all the mistakes they made against the Hokage's now gone son. Council chambers a few hours later. Now that the civilian council was gone, there could actually be civilized conversations. Also, Minato had to replace the advisors of the Hokage. So standing behind him as his new advisor was Sarutobi Hiruzen. Now, since there is no civilian council to meddle in the affairs of shinobi, we will finally do something about the academy. First, we will be changing the graduation age from 12 to 15 years old. Also, there will be less points based on useless knowledge such as history and academics, and more towards actually useful skills such as taijutsu, ninjutsu, genjutsu, etc. So any students that were supposed to graduate this year will have to wait another 3 years. We will also be making them perform their firsts when they turn 14 so that they don't freeze up in the middle of a mission. Any student unable to meet the requirements and take a life will be dropped from the ninja program without exception. Understood, stated the Hokage. He had to make sure these kids were ready for whatever the future may throw at them. He could tell he'd be getting gray hairs by the time his daughter graduated from the academy. Back with Naruto and the gang. Are we there yet? I'd like to talk to this leader of yours as soon as possible if you wouldn't mind. Half said, half ordered a certain Naruto. He couldn't wait to utterly destroy Yagura and his followers. They would pay for making Haku cry. Yes, we have just arrived, Naruto-san, and I would recommend changing your clothes before we meet with Mei-sama, responded Chojuro with slight annoyance. He was annoyed that the blonde had decided to separate from the group earlier in order to relieve his hunger, as he said it, and returned covered in blood and a little bit of brain. It didn't help that Haku was also covered in the same fluids as Naruto since they had gone together. Due to Haku saying that she and her, Narukoi, don't spend enough time with one another. You know what, I would rather not delay our meeting any more than we already have, so no, I will not be changing my clothing. Stated Naruto. Neither will I, said Haku from attached to Naruto's arm. She simply loved the warmth of his body, so she tried to stay as attached to him as possible. Even going as far as both of them sleeping in order to maximize body heat, as Haku puts it. Not that Naruto complained after, why would he? Within a few minutes they were approached by a few Kirin in that seemed to be Junin level, who proceeded to speak with Ao. Once they finished their conversation, they passed through, heading towards the largest stone in terms of width. It was clear that all of the buildings around them were created using Doden jutsus. Efficient and time-saving, as well as unnoticeable from above due to the mist density, which is probably made even denser by several ninjas using the ninpo, hiding in the mist no jutsu around the base, therefore enhancing this base's subtleness. However, due to the density of the mist, which is completely filled with large amounts of chakra, it's like a flare announcing our location if one is a sensor. Stated Naruto in a matter-of-fact tone. His deduction on the appearance of the base and its surroundings was spot on, and pointed out a major flaw on one of their defenses caused the nearby nin to start to sweat. They arrived at the building, and once they entered the room, Naruto laid his eyes on someone that reminded him of his biological mother in terms of figure and also somewhat similar in the feeling of her chakra. She stood at 5 feet 8 inches, which was average for her age, and she had burnt orange hair covered her left eye and part of her nose with a blue dress that reached her knees and split at the hip on the right side. Her size seemed to be around mid-D cup with a nice bubble butt to complete her figure. Her legs were fishnet stockings that went under her Anbu grade shin guards that were connected to her ninja sandals. Her eyes were a beautiful sea foam green, and her luscious lips were a natural pink that one might mistake it for lipstick. Naruto knew it was natural because he didn't smell any lipstick from her. When she turned around from the wall that seemed to have a huge map of Kiri on it, she gasped when her eyes finally landed on Zabuza. She started trembling a little bit and her head was held a little down so her hair covered her face from view. That's when Zabuza started slowly walking backwards with his hands held up in a position of surrender. And now let's stay calm here, Mei-chan. I know it's been a while, but please don't do anything drastic, pleaded Zabuza as he actually looked terrified of what she would do next. Naruto couldn't help but wonder who this woman was and what she could do that left Zabuza a stammering mess. At least until he saw her somehow move faster than a Hiraishin and crash into Zabuza, sending them both into the closest wall, leaving cracks all around the wall. Zabuza looked as though all life had been ed out of him. Zabuza! Yelled out Mei as she squeezed the life out of him. When she looked up at his face with an adorably teary look on her face, she saw that his soul was slowly escaping through his mouth. Imagine like in FMA, B. Oh no, you don't, you you make me think you dead for years and you try to ge out it by trying to die. Hell no. She yelled out in a rage as her hair swirled around her as she grabbed his soul and threw it back into his body. Yup, she was definitely related to the Uzumaki clan in one way or another. Once his soul blew through his body, he opened his eyes and started holding his chest. Air. Oh, I had no idea just how much I love thee, yelled out Zabuza as he gasped for the much-needed oxygen. Then he noticed Mei on her knees with her head down. He could hear her crying and was able to see her tears fall to the ground. He then did something no one who had ever heard about Zabuza Momochi would think capable of doing. He hugged her. Naruto immediately looked outside to make sure it wasn't the apocalypse while Haku tried to dispel what appeared to be a genjutsu. What are you two doing? Asked Zabuza as he held Mei while she cried her heart out in happiness and worry. I am making sure the world isn't ending and Haku is making sure this isn't a genjutsu, stated Naruto as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. Well, I can understand you by why Haku, I mean she knows that I am capable of hugging people, asked Zabuza in justified confusion. Well, I thought it might be fun, stated Haku in all sincerity. Zabuza just stared with a deadpan while Naruto was laughing his off over in some random corner. In all this time Mei was crying but managed to calm down by the time their conversation ended. She stood up and she gave Zabuza a regular hug and rested her head on his chest. Idiot! Don't disappear on me like that ever again, you hear me? Do you have any idea how worried I was that you left me alone in this world? Yelled out Mei in a desperate voice as she held on to him as hard as she could in case he disappeared if she didn't do so. Shish, it's alright, Mei-chan. I'm here. I'll always be here by your side, comforted Zabuza as best he could. It worked and she calmed down and smiled at him. She then noticed that they weren't alone and blushed in embarrassment. Oh hello, and who are you two kids? She asked in a sweet voice as if she were talking to a child unable to care for themselves. She already pissed off Naruto with only 8 words. Damn, a new record. The woman next to me is Haku Momochi, adoptive daughter of Zabuza Momochi as well as his apprentice. I am Naruto Okami and I will be the one to end this war. Also, if you call me a child again after seeing what I am able to do, then I will rip out your ovaries and heal you without you ever finding out unless you have an examination by a medical professional, said Naruto with a sickly sweet smile and an aura of death around him. He hated being treated like a child by those he didn't consider his family. A boy called Fishcake Wolf claims. It's Maelstrom, not Fishcake. Oh my bad. Maelstrom Wolf claims that he will be the one to end this hellish war with his girlfriend, who happens to be Zabuza's apprentice and adopted daughter. Did I miss anything? Said the possible Uzumaki in a tone that was dripping with sarcasm. Actually, I'll be doing it alone, and Haku is not my girlfriend, she is my mate. Stated Naruto without missing a beat as held Haku by the waist while she rested her head on the top of his head since he was still under his special henge. Just as Mei was about to make a comeback, they sensed an incredible amount of chakra to the north of them and was approximately 30 meters away. Yagura, but how did he find us? Asked Mei in complete terror. This was their only base since they couldn't risk have multiple bases due to lack of communication. If this base fell, then they lost and Yagura won, and that terrified her. Wow, I can't believe how lucky I am that this Jinchuriki is able to work together with his inner demon, giving him a powerful sensor inside his soul. Well, might as well get this over with so that Haku and I can be shown to our rooms and get a good night's sleep. Haku, Zabuza, I need you to make sure the rebels don't get in my way. I'll take care of the rest, said Naruto with absolute confidence. Alright kid, just don't get yourself to understand, stated Zabuza, not wanting his newest apprentice of about 1 week. After he was done with his short words of good luck, Haku came up and brought him for a passionate kiss and brought his hand toward her plump. Hurry up and that bastard for okay. If you do that you'll get a rewards tonight, said Haku into his ear in a lusty voice. She then removed his hand from her and then walked away, and with a small sway of her hips to make sure his attention stayed on her for a little while longer. Well, looks like we're gonna have to take them out faster than expected. You ready to come on out, Okami? Asked Naruto while walking towards the enemy as the rebels were all being evacuated to a safe distance away from the base. Hell yay, brother. Let's show these just what the Okami brothers can do, responded Okami with a bloodthirsty grin on his face. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, said Naruto as a shadow clone poofed into existence next to him. He then noticed how the clone slowly started to change into Okami. So now standing 100 meters away from both of them was an army of no less than 1,000 Kiri nin loyal to Yagura, with Yagura himself all the way in the back waiting to see if he really needs to fight against whatever forces the rebels send his way. Alright brother, let's get this massacre started, yelled out Naruto. After cancelling his special henge, he unsealed his scythes and charged towards the enemy while Okami simply charged forward on all fours. Couldn't have said it better myself, roared out Okami as he reached the first enemy and ripped into his chest with one of his tails and then threw him towards more of the enemy and repeated the action with each tail several times. Naruto had yet to use any of his jutsus that were connected to his scythes and had just been slicing off limbs and shredding through the enemy quite literally. So far, after 5 minutes of slaughtering lambs, Naruto hated around 160 enemies and Okami hated around 150 enemies and noticed he was falling behind. Demon release. The Alphas' pack, yelled out Okami. Once he gathered up enough chakra, it leaked out through every part of his body and formed a pack of about 20 silver wolves all around him. He was their alpha and they would follow whatever order he gave. So he gave them a simple one. And they did. Since they were pure chakra constructs, as long as he kept feeding them his chakra they would not fall. With this he'd be able to rack up these in no time. Damn it, he's getting more A's than I am. What to do? I got it, thought Naruto as began forming hand signs that Okami knew all too well. God damn it, that should be against the rules, thought Okami in anger. Once Naruto had gathered 2 taels worth of chakra and focused each one into his scythes, he yelled out the name of the jutsu as he jumped into the sky. Demon release. Shinigami's army of winged demons, yelled out Naruto as swung his blades out in front of him, releasing a tidal wave of black yokai that headed towards the army as they tried to take out Okami on the ground. Only 50 feet before hitting the ground, the black yokai changed into tiny winged demons that when coming into contact with anything they rotted it away within seconds and multiplied, using the rot to give birth to even more winged demons. Needless to say, Naruto was well in the lead with this jutsu that he created after thinking of ways to destroy the village of Konoha as deliciously as possible. With Haku, Zabuza, Mei, and the rest of the rebels. Who the hell is this kid and how is he doing this? Asked Mei in complete and utter amazement. With the jutsus this guy was pulling out of Hish might actually be able to Yagura, especially with that last technique. They looked like small black bats except they had arms and legs longer than those of an actual bat. He is Naruto Okami, and he is my loving mate and future husband. Said Haku in a happy tone. He is also turning me on immensely, thought Haku in continuation as she pressed her thighs together. She gasped when she saw Naruto bring his scythes together and form one large scythe that simply emanated death as well as the cloak that was now covering most of his body. Oh shit. Narukoi is now really pissed if he's going into that form. Whispered out Haku in complete amazement. The ground around her mate began to rot away and crack with every step he took. It seemed as though life feared him and fled whenever his presence was near. What is it? What is he doing now? Asked Mei in a mixture of fascination and fear. She was amazed at what he could do but feared at the thought of being on the wrong side of the battlefield when he was on it. That is his Shinigami Henkin and he only uses on those that truly piss him off. He was initially only going to use this against Yagura, but one of his men must have said something that really pissed him off. Replied Haku while eating from a random bag of popcorn that seemingly appeared out of nowhere. Back with Naruto and Okami a few moments before. Looks like I'm winning this, Okami. I am willing to accept the terms of your surrender over a few dozen boxes of Pak over a few dozen boxes of Paki. Stated Naruto in a gleeful voice as he was winning this little game of theirs. You bastards. You think that this is a game? This is a war against those disgusting demonic bloodline users. They deserve to die for sleeping with demons in order to get their powers. They deserve to suffer for their abilities. Yelled out one rather foolish Anbu, which started up a rallying cry for his fellow Anbu. However, this only signed their death warrants. Not just the death warrants for their bodies but for their souls as well. Hey dumbasses. I would be commit suicide as fast as I could if I were you. Because you have just summoned the wrath of the Shinigami no Okami. Stated Okami as he slowly started backing away from Naruto along with his wolves who returned to his bodies. I won't even give you bastards the chance to save your souls from being utterly obliterated. Stated Naruto as her let his Yukai fill his entire body. He recalled all of his winged demons and had them each crash into his body, slowly forming a cloak of darkness that completely covered his body. He had slammed his two scythes together and the handles began to merge together while the blades melted into the handles as they grew. Once the handle had grown to about 5 feet, it stopped. Then a blade slowly grew out from the top side of the blade and grew to reach around 3 feet in length and a whole foot in thickness. Every living thing has a time to live and a time to die. All things must turn to dust as they always must. And now it is your time to rot, suffer for your crimes. Jigoku Kara no Sume, yelled out Naruto as he swung his scythe into the ground until only an inch of the blade was still visible. Then suddenly there were thousands of long black tentacle-like arms with claws coming out of the ground. These arms first targeted the remains of those who were lucky enough to have already been. They were then somehow consumed by these hands. The bodies disappeared within seconds. What the air you talking about? Asked Yagura, completely dumbfounded from what this apparent lunatic had just said. Who the hell was Donatello? This idiot had justed off his army and done it with a ing smile on his face alongside his companion and was now spouting about some nonsense that involved Ninja Turtles and a being known as Shredder. Alright, I've been with this dude most of his life and for my entire life, yet this is the first time I haven't understood a single ing word he said and I'm supposed to be the insane one. Yelled out Okami in utter confusion. Even Yuki was sweat dropping at this, though not that anyone could see her. You become a turtle when you let the Sanbi take control and you use a bow staff as your main weapon. That leads me to believe that you are Donatello of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Now tell where Raphael, Leonardo, and Michelangelo or so that I may slay them as well. Yelled out a now completely incoherent Naruto. Just as Yagura was about to ask Naruto what the hell he was talking about, he sensed three other strange chakra signatures approaching him as he readied himself for attack. What he saw, however, completely dumbfounded him. Damn it, he found out about our existence. All right, turtles, let's try and take him out just like we did with Shredder in our new completely stupid movie. Yelled a human-sized turtle wearing a blue headband that covered the top of his face except for the eyes. Cowabunga, dudes! Yelled out the turtle with the orange headband. This has to be one of the craziest genjutsus that I have ever had the displeasure of being stuck in. If I allow myself to be beaten by this unknown factor, I'll probably myself before being forced to live with that kind of humiliation. Thought Yagura as he dispelled the genjutsu and noticed that his enemies had not moved at all, which was strange since he would have thought that they would have taken advantage of that temporary distraction to try and him. Quote, comma dot. Why didn't you try and me while I was trapped in that genjutsu? Asked Yagura in disbelief as he thought that this might have been a double-layered genjutsu. That's simple. Because I'm going to make you suffer for not only ing people simply because of something they cannot control and for taking control of one of my fellow Jinchuriki, Obito Uchiha. Stated Naruto calmly as he saw Yagura's eyes widen in surprise. What did you think I wouldn't be able to sense that Yagura was under an extremely powerful genjutsu which allows you to talk through him? How do you know my name? Everyone in Konoha thinks I died, so how the hell do you know WHOIAM? Yelled out Yagura, aka Obito, in anger and confusion. How did this man know who he was, and better yet, how did he know that Yagura was under a genjutsu? Only someone with eyes as strong or stronger than his own would be able to see through that genjutsu. You're probably wondering how my eyes were able to notice your genjutsu and how I know who you are, Obito-chan. It's simple, really. I am a god, and nothing gets past the eyes of a god. Yelled out Naruto as he released the rest of his chakra-suppressing seals, revealing his full power. With his full power unleashed and it being changed into Yukai, the entire clearing that was a full mile in diameter was starting to rot away. The very ground they were standing on seemed as weak as glass. One step might plunge them to the very center of the planet. What the hell is this? His chakra pools are at least on par with the Nanabi. And it feels as though if I make a wrong move it will consume me along with Yagura. Thought Obito as he was witnessing this from a safe location. Now the time for talking is over. It is time to die. Yelled out Naruto as he flared his chakra. Then something unexpected occurred. Out of the back of his cloak came bone-like protrusions. They seemed to form in the shape of wings. Two bird-like wings that seemed to have survived the test of time, if only barely. There was barely any flesh, and even then it was completely rotten while most of the bone was visible. The wings stretched out to about 4 feet in length each, and with a powerful flap he soared into the sky. Yagura was preparing for any sort of attack that might come his way, while Okami was just sitting on a rotten tree stump waiting for Naruto to Yagura and plant fear deep into Obito's heart so that he knows that they will be coming for him and he will not escape. Yagura waited for Naruto to perform some kind of jutsu when he saw Naruto suddenly dive bomb straight down covered in his black yukai. Once he hit the ground there was no disturbance except for the small hole made by his scythe as the blade once again entered the ground. At first everyone thought it was a distraction until they felt the ground trembling under their feet. Suddenly an arm made entirely of bone rose up from the ground, and along with it a corpse comprised of only bone and nothing else. In its hands were throwing axes. Its skull held no eyes, only 2 holes that glowed a bright red as the flame within its eyes brightened. Following it were hundreds of other forgotten warriors that rose from the earth. Each skeletal ninja had their bones turn black until they seemed as though they were made from obsidian. As they walked forward towards their master, their bones began to separate and fly towards Naruto. Piece by piece, corpse by corpse, Naruto's form became covered in bones until he grew to the height of 50 feet and was comprised completely of bones. What seemed like muscle fibers were tiny bones pressed against each other, forming muscles that could move this giant beast. He appeared to be in the shape of a man that was completely white and seemed to have no skin hiding his muscles. The upper body was bare and filled with bones replacing muscles. The lower body was hidden by black loose pants that seemed to have been made by the same energy that was being used earlier. The face was completely blank. There were no eyes, mouth, nose, ears, or hair on the head. It was very strong considering the weapon it was able to carry. The weapon it was carrying was a giant hammer whose grip was 40 feet long and 5 feet wide. The grip itself was black with white wrappings that hung loosely. The hammer was a gold color with red markings that seemed like seals etched into the metal. This weapon was known as Kodaibato no Hama, Hammer of the Ancients. Looks like Naruto is getting serious if he's using that, huh? Stated Okami as he witnessed the monster lift the hammer above its head using both hands. Then using who knows how much strength it slammed it down and caused the earth to split into giant pieces of rubble while simultaneously kicking up a decent amount of dirt which served as cover. However, it did not cover the monster entirely, which Yagura thought to be rather foolish. Why would he try to create cover for himself if he cannot even use it for hiding that huge body of his? Thought Yagura, not understanding the beast's tactics. At least not until he felt a blade enter through the back of his shoulder and exit through the front and heard a voice that should be coming from ahead of him and not from behind. Did you really think that I would have had my summon create a diversion so that it could attack? Please, only I will have the pleasure of inflicting you pain and misery for those you have tortured and that look towards you for protection. Yelled out Naruto as he revealed himself from behind Yagura, no longer in his Shinigami Henkin and now back into his regular outfit. But how? It thought you had become that monster in front of me? Asked Yagura, slightly afraid of his opponent noticing that if that really was his summon then he had summoned him without so much as breaking a sweat, especially after all those Anbu. Didn't you hear me? I said that the being in front of you was my summon. I simply used a simple shunshin when all those bones had covered my body from view. Now hurry up and turn into the Sanbi. You won't be able to even scratch me if you don't, said Naruto in a mocking tone in an attempt to rile his opponent. Fortunately it worked. Alright, but try not to die too quickly. Yelled out the now Sanbi-fied Yagura as he slowly turned into the giant three-tailed turtle. The Sanbi was easily larger than Naruto's summon. Its leg was taller than the summon by at least another 100 feet. The Sanbi was known for being the smallest of all the bijus due to it being a turtle, but it was by no means the weakest. Now that Yagura had fully turned into the Sanbi, Naruto dispelled his unique summon and grabbed his two scythes and ran straight towards the released biju. His 7 tails behind him ready to attack and intercept any incoming attacks from the prey. The hunt had finally begun and it seemed as though they were having turtle stew tonight. Oh no you don't, I won't let you anywhere near me, yelled out Yagura as he started to go into his shell and sent his 3 tails in for an attack. While his head was inside the shell he began charging up his Amari. Menacing ball, some thought that the tails were needed to help stabilize the charging up of the Amari. However, due to Yagura using the inside of the Sanbi's shell as a way to stabilize the chakra output and input, he was able to prepare his attack with his opponent being unaware. Naruto didn't slow down at all as he used his tails to block and fend off the Sanbi's tails. Since his tails were smaller in size, he merely focused his Yukai into his tails in order to make them large enough to block the 3 tails attacking him. In all, it was a rather amusing sight, seeing as how a human had 7 huge tails coming out of his when each of the tails was bigger than he was. How the hell did he keep his balance? Simple. While using his Yukai to make the tails bigger, that didn't mean he made them heavier by any means. He simply made them really huge and really light for convenience. Then the Sanbi sent its 3 tails in at once, thinking that the total force would be enough to crush the surprisingly powerful human. Too bad he was in for a shock as Naruto simply stopped using his tails and decided to merge his scythes together and cut through the tails. This of course caused the Sanbi an untold amount of pain. For any biju they had a certain weak point that caused them a huge amount of pain and agony. For all the biju this weak point is their tails. If their tails were injured the pain would be felt 100-fold. Of course, it was very difficult for someone to injure a tailed beast, let alone their tails, which has even stronger skin on its, causing most damage to not even affect it. Too bad this didn't apply to Naruto, as he simply cut through the tails while not cutting off any parts of the tails. He would never do that to a fellow Biju, since he has the same weakness as they do. However, that doesn't apply to simply cutting the tails. Though Naruto felt a small amount of pity for the Sanbi, he kept going and ran closer towards the opening in the shell. Yugura was in an unbelievable amount of pain from the injuries on his tails. It was almost enough pain to cause him to lose focus of the Amari, which would have probably led him through decapitation and serious bodily injury. Luckily for him, however, he was able to keep up the attack and had charged it up enough by the time Naruto had reached the opening in his shell through which his head entered through. A bright flash was all Naruto saw before being engulfed by Yugura's Amari, which went all the way until the horizon before disappearing. Yugura, thinking that he hated his opponent, reverted back into his regular body and started walking towards Okami in order to take him out. "Why aren't you preparing to attack or even defend yourself, scum?" asked Yugura, confused as to why this fool in front of him was simply lying there trying to take a nap instead of trying to fight for his own continued survival. His next words shook him to his very core. "You know, you shouldn't turn your back on your enemy. It could get you ED," stated Okami as he lazily waved off Yugura, trying to get back to his nap. Yugura quickly turned around and saw that his previous opponent, who he thought was dead, was very much alive and looked as though the attack he had just gone through was a simple love tap. "How the hell are you still alive? That attack was from point blank range. You shouldn't even be ashes in the wind," demanded Yugura as he fell back on his in fear from the monster in front of him. "That attack wasn't even a fraction of what my mate can do when she's really trying. So I guess it's time for me to torture the out of you, huh?" said Naruto as he created chakra chains and some Hyouten Senbon around both him and Yugura in preparation. Yugura attempted to run away by created several dozen Mizu Bunshin to confuse Naruto while he ran away. Too bad for him that he forgot about all those Senbons, which cut into all those Mizu Bunshins and himself like a knife did to butter. All around Yugura were pools of water and small drops of blood, since Senbon aren't really weapons of large bloodshed. However, since Naruto knew where all the pressure points that inflicted pain and pleasure were, he targeted all the ones that caused untold amounts of pain and simply walked slowly towards the paralyzed body of Yugura. "By now you've already been released from the genjutsu that was controlling you. Yet you kept on fighting me. Why? You could have simply surrendered, but you chose to continue fighting me. Why?" asked Naruto in confusion. He knew it wasn't really Yugura's fault. He was simply a pawn in this long game of chess between Naruto and Obito. "Because I don't deserve to live after what I put my people through due to my own weakness. So please do me the favor of me before they try to use me once more. At least this way I can buy you a few years before they can try and capture you," stated Yugura now that he was in control of his paralyzed body. "It is the least I can do for a fellow brother of mine," said Naruto solemnly as he raised his scythe up into the air and brought it down towards Yugura's head. Blood flew out into the air as the wound released large amounts of the bodily fluid. Unfortunately, this blood did not belong to Yugura. The blood belonged to Obito, who had used Kamui to teleport to Yugura's location and sacrificed his right arm in order to change the trajectory of Naruto's swing. "Sorry, but I can't let you him yet. This is good ga," screamed out Obito as he felt his other arm get sliced off by Okami, who had conveniently woken up from his nap. For some reason he was unable to use his Kamui abilities to escape with or without Yugura. It was as though there was something preventing him from using that specific ability. "Did you really think that we would be dumb enough to let you live and escape from us so that you can cause even more annoyances for us later down the road? While we would easily be able to take down whatever plan you could possibly have, we'd rather not have to deal with it. So goodbye, and don't worry, we'll make good use of whatever information that's in that mind of yours," said Okami as he buried his claws into Obito's eyes and prominently ended his life. So are you going to me now or what? Asked Yagura as he lied there, not knowing what to expect now that he was watching Okami feasting upon the brain of Obito Uchiha while Naruto was cleaning off his scythes using Obito's Akatsuki robe. I was going to, but due to the information both myself and Okami are receiving from his brain, we are going to need you for something after all. As long as you accept, of course. So choose die for your crimes or work for me as part of something great. Stated Naruto as he was rubbing his head, try alleviate the migraine that was going through his head from the influx of memories. Time skip. Konoha 3 years later, graduation day. It had been 3 years since Naruto had left Konoha. It had been 3 years since Danzo had escaped along with a good amount of his root Anbu and had yet to be found. It had been 3 years since the public execution of the civilian council. And it had been 3 years since the Hokage and his family found out about what Naruto had been forced to go through because of their foolish trust in the goodness of the villagers. Today was the day set for the academy students to graduate and become genins if they passed the exams given to them by their respective Junin sensei. While the civilian portion of the class were barely genin level, those that came from clans had been trained by their families and were mostly chunin level with a few exceptions. Anyway, currently sitting inside the classroom were the graduating class of Konoha. Among them were Hinata and Neji Hyuga, Tenten, Shino Aburame, Hikari Uzumaki Namikaze, Sayuri Uchiha, Choji Akamichi, Shikamaru Nara, Kiba Inuzuka, Rock Lee, Ino Yamanaka, and finally Sai Shimura. A lot of these students had changed over the years. Hinata had long hair tied up into a ponytail that reached her upper back. She wore mesh armor underneath her dark purple short-sleeved shirt. She had matured to a good size C cup, which did not go unnoticed by the rest of her class. On her arms she wore Anbu forearm protectors with black gloves that had a metal plate on the back. She wore tight-fitting black Anbu pants with shin protectors and combat boots instead of the traditional shinobi footwear. For her preferred weapon of choice she had a pair of claws sealed inside of each of her wrists that worked great with her family's taijutsu. She wore her forehead protector around her neck. She now stood at a height of 5 feet 8 inches. Neji wore the same clothes as Shippuden. Same thing with Lee, Tenten, Choji, Rock Lee, Sai, and Ino. Shino had the same haircut as always and wore the same traditional Aburame sunglasses. He wore a large black trench coat which reached all the way to his calves. Under the trench coat he wore a simple dark green muscle shirt with mesh armor underneath. He also wore black combat pants that had several pockets on each leg. In each pocket there were medical supplies along with some rations so that he could at least survive for a week without having to hunt. He had several seals inside of his jacket so that he could store kunai, shuriken, senbon, etc. However, the biggest change in Shino was the sadistic grin that was on his face. He asked Ibiki to train him in the ninja arts that pertained to torture and information gathering. He also had Anko help him from time to time. That totally had nothing to do with his now somewhat sadistic tendencies. He was now at the height of 5 feet 10 inches and had his forehead protector tied around his right arm. His specialized weapons were 2 hidden knives under his wrist that were hollow. He could fill them with bugs and then inject them into the enemy. Hikari had cut her hair short so that it now only barely reached her shoulders. Her lips now sporting a minuscule amount of red lipstick. She wore mesh armor underneath a black long-sleeve shirt with a red sleeveless hoodie on top. She wore black combat pants that also had as many pockets as Shino's, but within each pocket was material necessary for fuinjutsu. She had seals all around her arms and legs which contained kunai, senbon, shuriken, etc. Though her figure was mostly hidden by her loose clothing, she had actually developed rather well. Like Hinata, she was also at AC cup size and they were both still growing. For her special choice of weapons she had chains along her arms which could be used rather effectively with her taijutsu style. She now stood at the height of 5 feet 9, and had her forehead protector around her left leg. Sayuri had grown out her hair to look like her mother's but wore it in a ponytail with 2 bangs framing her face for missions and spars. She wore a white karate gi that was open down the middle, revealing her mesh armor and bandages that covered her chest from view. She wore tight-fitting black shorts that showed off hairlong with anbu shin guards. She wore regular ninja sandals and had two swords on her hips. One had a light blue almost white handle with a gray sheath while the other had a red handle with an orange sheath. They seemed to be standard katana, but they were so much more when used in battle by Sayuri. She stood at the same height as her friend Hikari and had her forehead protector on her right leg. Kiba had grown out his hair to seem like a mane and kept it in a ponytail behind, reaching all the way to his mid-back in length, which resembled a certain super pervert. He wore a fur coat made out of bear fur that reached down to his thighs in length. This special kind of bear fur could only be found in the Forest of Death. He had a scar on his face that started from his left cheek and ended all the way to above his right eyebrow. For pants he wore anbu pants with scrolls attached to the sides of his legs. He wore combat boots that looked like they had claws on the end of where the toes would be. He simply wore mesh armor underneath the fur coat instead of a shirt. He stood at 5 feet 11 inches and wore his forehead protector as a belt. All of them were currently talking about random subjects as they waited for their academy sensei to arrive and read off the list of the team placements. It was no secret that Sayuri, Hikari, and Hinata all wanted to be on a team with each other since they were rather good friends during the school years and had excellent teamwork, which was shown during their team spars. Although Hinata would have also been content being on a team with her boyfriend Shino, she knew that she couldn't argue with the placements. Yes, Hinata was dating Shino and did not have some fanatical crush on Naruto. She and Shino had become rather good friends during the academy, and eventually one day Shino had asked her out on a date when they were 14. Obviously the date went rather well and they were a couple ever since. It helped that both Shibi Aburame and Hiyashi Hyuga were old friends back in the day. Neji currently had his arm around Tenten's shoulder while she rested on his chest during the group conversation. They had been dating since age 13 and their relationship had been going rather well since then. And by well I mean they were rarely seen without each other. Who would have thought that Neji could have been so clingy? Ino was rubbing her fingers through her boyfriend's hair as he was taking a nap on her lap. Yup, Ino was dating Sai Shimura, biological son of Danzo Shimura and former root agent, and she was the reason why Sai regained his emotions that he had lost so long ago. When Sai was first admitted into the class, most people tried and failed to get anything out of him. Fortunately for him, Ino wasn't most people and she just wouldn't stop trying to get some kind of emotion out of him. After a certain survival exercise they had apparently become a couple, considering that when they exited the Forest of Death they were both covered in blood and guts, yet she was just holding on to his arm lovingly and he had his blade in his hand with a small smile on his face. The group thought when they saw this was only Ino. Rock Lee was currently trying to get his eternal rival to accept his challenge. His rival, amazingly enough, was actually Shikamaru. Though Shikamaru wasn't super muscular or motivated, that by no means meant that he was weak. Because of what happened with Naruto years ago, the clan heads decided to really up their training so that they would be prepared for Naruto's eventual revenge. So currently Shikamaru had mastered half of his clan's special techniques and knew a total of 20 jutsus that were useful in about any situation, which is how he was able to take on Lee during their spars. Also, since he kinda resembled Kakashi in laziness, Lee decided they were destined to be rivals. Yup, poor Shikamaru. This was the scene that Iruka had arrived in on when he finally arrived to his graduating class. He was proud of each and every one of his students. He knew that they would be able to survive the horrors of the ninja world. Though for most of the civilian-based students in the room he figured that they would probably stop at Chunin and settle down soon after. Alright everyone, calm down so that I can read off the team placements. Yelled out Iruka using his weird big head jutsu thing. I would label it as a Kekkei Genkai since it would seem as though he is the only one that could do that. Luckily for him he only needed to use it once for today, since the sooner he got through this the sooner they could meet their new senseis. Alright, now team 1 will be Started out Iruka before he was somehow mentally blocked out by some omniscient powerful being until he reached Team 7. Yup, being the author rules. Team 7 will be Hikari Uzumaki Namikaze, Sayuri Uchiha, and Hinata Hyuga. Your Junin sensei will be Fugaku Uchiha, stated Iruka as he received the attention of those whose names he had just called out. Fugaku had returned to active duty after what was known as the Naruto incident, and decided to become a Junin sensei for these specific 3 genins out of the blue. Of course Minato accepted his request but was no less confused nor stunned by this than anyone else except for the Uchiha family and surprisingly the Hyuga family, though no one noticed their reaction or rather lack thereof. Team 8 will be Neji Hyuga, Tenten, and Rock Lee. Your Junin sensei will be Maeda Guy, stated Iruka as he felt a chill go up his spine just like Neji and Tenten did when they heard that name. Lee on the other hand was cheering about youthful senseis and the like. Kami have mercy on their sanity. Who am I kidding, when you're a ninja you barely have any of that anyway, and adding Guy into the mix will simply shatter it. Oh well, if their minds break I can rebuild them, I hope. Team 9 will be Kiba Inuzuka, Shino Aburame, Choji Akamichi. Your Junin sensei will be Asuma Sarutobi, stated Iruka as he continued to read off the placements of the teams. Team 10 will be Shikamaru Nara, Ino Yamanaka, and Sai Shimura. Your Junin sensei will be Kurenai Yuki, stated Iruka with a slight blush on his face as he imagined a certain black-haired scarlet-eyed genjutsu mistress. A sneeze was then heard from the hallway. Well, now none of you are in my class and I will do you the favor of not boring you half to death with a speech on how the ninja world really is, because if you don't get it by now then you aren't fur to be a ninja. Anyways, see ya, there is a ton of alcohol and a horrible hangover with my name on it, stated Iruka as he began to leave his class in favor of a few drink of alcohol until he was sent flying out the window due to the door smashing into his face and ending him flying thanks to a certain green beast. Yosh. Team 8, come with me. It is time for us to be reunited. Youth. Yelled out Guy as he did his horrifying pose of terrorizing youth. You see, when Minato changed the graduation year for the Genin, Guy's team had to go back to the academy and graduate with the rest of the group. This didn't mean that he stopped training them. This only meant he had to train them earlier in the day and later into the night to make up for the lost time spent in the academy. Yosh. Guy Sensei. Lee. Guy Sensei. Lee. And so began the horrifying and unbreakable genjutsu that was somehow transmitted throughout the classroom and through the walls of the building. A beach appeared behind the green duo with a beautiful sunset suffering in the horizon. Many attempted to break this genjutsu but none were able to succeed. Hikari grabbed a random rock off of the beach floor and had it skip over the water. Well, that's impossible, stated Hikari as her eyes widened slightly in response to the strange occurrence. Luckily Sayuri was smart enough to not use her Sharingan to try and see through the genjutsu and risk the image being permanently burned into the recesses of her mind. Shut the up. We want to meet our senseis already, yelled out Hinata as she activated her Byakugan and got into her Juken stance with her claws equipped and releasing random sparks of lightning. Needless to say, Guy and Lee thought it best not to anger the terrifying Hyuga heiress. After all, hell hath no fury like a woman scorned, and they'd rather not see that proved right today or any other day for that matter. Team 9, hurry up and come with me, said Amma in a rather lazy tone as he smoked his cancer stick. Needless to say, Kiba, Shino, and Choji moved like the Yondaime when they heard their savior giving them a way out. They ran out of the room carrying their sensei in their arms, running faster Guy with his weights off. Team 10, follow me, stated Kurenai simply as she thought of a way to convince the Hokage of making Guy's signature genjutsu a kinjutsu so that it will never be used again except maybe for torture. Yay, that will get them talking. Team 7, meet me on the rooftop in 5 seconds. If you are late you automatically fail, stated Fugaku as he dispelled, revealing he was nothing more than a shadow clone. Immediately the girls in Team 7 performed their respective shunshin to arrive at their required locations. Rooftop. Fugaku had been waiting on the roof of the academy waiting for his clone to deliver his message and for his students to arrive. Soon enough 3 shunshuns began to form. The first one he noticed was comprised of 9 balls of orange fire coming together and forming Hikari. The second one was comprised of an almost white flame in the shape of a wolf that began to stand on its hind legs and dissipate into Sayuri. The last one was a storm cloud that appeared about 20 feet in the sky that released a bolt of lightning that revealed the form of a certain Hyuga heiress. Impressive, and luckily for all of you, you made it with a full second to spare, said Fugaku with no small amount of pride in his voice. After all, he had helped train these 3 during their time in the academy. To him they were all like daughters to him, especially Sayuri, since she was obviously his daughter. Now I want each of you to tell me about yourselves, such as your likes, dislikes, dreams and whatnot. Now someone start, said Fugaku as he leaned against the railing waiting for their responses. I'll go first. My name is Hikari Uzumaki Namikaze and I like a lot of things such as ramen, my friends and family, and training. My dislikes are the stupid villagers who can't see past their own hatred, the now deceased civilian council, Danzo, rapists, and the 3 minutes it takes to prepare ramen. My dream is to find my Ni-sama so that we can be together again, said Hikari with a blush at the end as she thought of her Ni-sama. Yup, her love for her Ni-sama did not waver in the slightest. If anything, it grew more apparent to those around her and she wasn't afraid to admit it. It even got to the point that many of the Anbu and her friends started calling her the brother complex. Not that she minded, hell, she actually liked the nickname. Good, now who's next? Asked Fugaku, having already known all of this beforehand. He knew everything about his precious genin already but decided to let them talk since this was how introductions usually went. At least that's what Kakashi told him. I'll go. My name is Sayuri Uchiha. My likes are my friends, my family, tomatoes, and wolves. My dislikes are rapists, those who betray their family, and prophecies. My dream is to reunite with a certain silver wolf and have a nice large loving family, after I become a kick-ass kunoichi, stated Sayuri with an air of confidence and a tinge of pink on her face as she touched her precious necklace, thinking of the one who stole her heart without even trying. Alright, I guess you gotta save the best for last. My name is Hinata Hyuga. My likes are most of my family, cinnamon rolls, the one who has done my family a great kindness, my friends, and my boyfriend Shino. My dislikes are the caged bird seal, ignorant fools who are too prideful to see when they are mistaken, and rapists. My dream is to one day repay my debt to one who has done my family the greatest kindness I could have asked for, said Hinata with a few tears at the end. Alright, now that introductions are out of the way, meet me on training ground 7 tomorrow morning at 8 so that I may give you your true genin test. Dismissed, said Fugaku in a militaristic tone as he disappeared in a shunshin that was the one unique to Konoha, which was just a bunch of leaves covering your body till you dissipate from view. Well, since we got the rest of the day to waste, how about we go get some lunch at that one barbecue place in the Akamichi district? You know how great their food is, suggested Hikari as they all started walking down the side of the building. Ever since the Hokage upped the required knowledge needed for the academy students if they wished to graduate, so now every genin that graduated knew the tree walking and water walking exercises along with the basic 3 jutsus, along with the Taju Kage Kunai no Jutsu and the Taju Kage Shuriken no Jutsu plus one of the elemental clones. Of course, if the civilian-based students knew all of this, then imagine what the Clan Air students knew. Next morning at Training Ground 7, Hikari, Sayuri, and Hinata were standing in front of their Junin sensei so that they could take their final test before becoming fully fledged genin. Well, normally this would be when I would tell you all to perform some random task that would require teamwork to accomplish, but since I haven't had my coffee yet and since the 3 of you are already great at working together, I see no point in doing so, stated Fugaku with a long yawn, trying to rid himself of his drowsiness without his morning coffee and so far failing. 3 sweat drops were the responses he received from his cute genin. Geez, you sure can be lazy when you wanna be, huh? 2-san. Stated Sayuri with her sweat drop steadily decreasing in size. Let it be known that without his morning coffee Fugaku could rival Inara in laziness if he didn't have his troublesome wife to keep him in line. Anyway, let's go and get our first C-rank mission as a team and hope that Murphy's Law doesn't make us its bitch today, said Fugaku as they all headed towards the cage tower to pick up their first mission as a genin. During the academy they had to do D-rank missions to build up teamwork. Outside of the academy or C rank and above. The highest mission a genin squad will be allowed to take is B rank. If a mission were to change ranking in the middle of its completion, then it would be up to the Junin in charge to decide whether or not they can complete the mission or abort it. Once they arrived they saw that the Hokage was about to prepare a Kaden Jutsu to burn all of the ink paperwork. Honestly, it's like it multiplies every time he looks away. Whenever he finished with one document it would be like two more replaced it in the ever-growing pile. Luckily for the paperwork, Team 7 chose that moment to walk in and save them. Hokage-sama, Team 7 reporting for AC rank mission, stated Fugaku, snapping Minato out of his insanity and saving the lives of hundreds of documents. Minato blinked for a few moments before sighing in a depressing manner before grabbing a random mission out of his mission files. Alright, how's this? You need to escort and protect a bridge builder from Konoha all the way to Nami no Kuni until he finishes the construction of his bridge. Do you accept? Asked Minato in a serious voice as he turned on his cage mode. They accepted the mission without complaint and met their client within seconds. The meeting left a lot to be desired. A lot. At least they now have a week to before they begin the mission due to Hikari sending him to the hospital via her chakra chains, which were gold in color with a hint of red due to the Kyuubi's chakra's slight influence on her own chakra. In Uzugakure around the same time. Alright, one of my spies has found Gato to be causing trouble in Nami no Kuni. I want you along with Haku to go and take him out. If any other ninjas get in your way, do what you wish with them. Just make sure neither of you die. Understood? Asked the Uzukage with a smile on his face. And why wouldn't he when he had a certain white-haired vixen's head bobbing up and down in between his legs? Hi Uzukage-sama, Narukoi, replied Haku and Zabuza as they went on their way. This sight had not bothered them since this was now a regular occurrence. Ever since Yuki got out of her seal, she and Naruto had been going at it like rabbits, especially in his office. Man, I hope Haku-chan gets back soon so that we can have a threesome. What do you think, Narukoi? Asked Yuki as if she hadn't just swallowed a gallon of his seed in the past hour or so. Man, ever since I marked you two as my mates you've been ing me dry. If this keeps up I'll die the way most men can only dream of. Having with bombshell wives. Kami, I'm the luckiest man in the world. Stated Naruto as pull Yuki back onto his continuing her blowjob marathon. With Haku and Zabuza. Alright Haku, let's get this mission over with quickly so that I can get back to Mayheim before she decides to melt my balls off from being away for so long. Said Zabuza with no small amount of fear. Haku merely giggled at the thought of her surrogate mother doing that to her surrogate father. After the defeat of Yagura, Zabuza and May married and were now settling down, with Zabuza taking missions while May being a housewife. Yup, she was living the dream. Whatever you say, 2-san. You should probably get Ka-chan a gift if you plan to keep your special friends you seem so attached to. Teased Haku as she kept giggling, much to the ire of a certain swordsman. Man, it's been what, a couple months since Naruto fully became the Juubi. I can't believe how much he's changed since then. Stated Zabuza as he remembered how Naruto used to act compared to how acts now. Now the kid was a shameless pervert who had in front of his ninja. Though only Haku, Naruto, and Yuki know exactly why his personality changed when he gained his final tail. Flashback no Jutsu. Naruto's 15th birthday. It had been 3 years since Naruto defeated Yagura and had those that survived and lived in Kiri move into Uzugakure. It had also been about 3 years since Naruto had become the Uzukage, considering he was the best candidate for that. He was currently taking the day off due to his power fluctuation. However, what happened next was something he would have never thought of happening. As he was feeling the intake of a tael's worth of chakra, he was suddenly taken into his mindscape. What was to happen in the short minutes to come? Naruto would break his heart and cause him to become depressed once again. Inside Naruto's mindscape. Damn, what the hell am I doing inside here now? Asked Naruto as he rubbed his head from the slight headache he was feeling. However, when he looked around, he noticed that this wasn't the regular part of his mindscape that he usually spent his time in. Looking around, he saw that he was inside of Okami's private space of his mind. I guess time's up, spoke Okami from in front of Naruto. He stood there in his regular clothing but with a sad expression on his face. What do you mean by that, brother? What do you that time is up? Asked Naruto, having a horrible feeling in the pit of his stomach. He had a very bad feeling about what his brother meant. We are gaining the powers of the Juubi, but you must have realized that there can only be one Juubi. Which means we have to fight to the death for control. The loser is absorbed by the winner. After all, in the end there can only be one Naruto Okami. Explained Okami as he got into his fighting stance. His knees slightly bent with his back straight and his arms in front. His left arm straight in front while his right arm was mostly behind his head with his fist right next to his face. What? Hell no, I won't fight you, yelled out Naruto, adamantly not wanting to fight the one he considered his brother. Too bad it wasn't his decision to make. Okami charged at him regardless of whether or not he would fight. As Okami threw punch after punch and kick after kick, Naruto simply dodged or blocked his attacks. He wouldn't even try to counter him, and that was pissing him off. Naruto, stop being an idiot. We have to fight. Don't you dare disgrace me with not even trying, damn it. I deserve better than that, yelled Okami, trying to get Naruto to see some reason. Having heard what he had to say, Naruto couldn't find it in himself to deny Okami this last fight. So without further hesitation, Naruto punched Okami in the gut and then roundhouse kicked him in the face. Even though tears were pouring down his cheeks, Naruto couldn't allow himself to simply lose. It would be an insult to his brother, and he would be damned before he insulted those close to him. Okami pulled himself back up and charged at Naruto with his claws raised for a slash that Naruto knew better than to block. So he dodged, and good thing too, because when Okami's claws hit the ground it created a small crater. In retaliation, Naruto closed the gap between them and raised his leg before bringing down on Okami's head faster than he could dodge, but slow enough for him to try and block. Too bad Naruto's leg strength was higher than Okami's arm strength, which was made apparent when the bones in his arms shattered along with parts of his skull when his kick finished its swing. However, Naruto jumped back knowing that the fight wasn't even close to being over. Okami simply got back up after a few moments of him healing. Now that taijutsu is out of the way, how about ninjutsu? Said Okami as he started to collect chakra into his hands as a ball of black chakra formed with an outer ring of what looked like condensed air. Shit, said Naruto in distress, knowing the jutsu that Okami was going to use all too well. He started to channel chakra through his feet as he summoned a wall of obsidian up from the ground in order to shield him from Okami's next attack. Dai Rasenringu. Great spiraling fear wheel, yelled out Okami as he threw the jutsu towards his brother. Naruto, knowing the obsidian wouldn't be enough, also covered himself in the Susanoo with only the ribcage for protection. Then there was a huge explosion, launching Naruto with his ribcage armor barely holding up until he finally landed on his back with blood dripping out of his mouth. As he stood up, he said only one word. Susanoo, said Naruto before he was completely covered in his perfect Susanoo form, which easily stood taller than even Yuki in her Kyuubi form Naruto had taken to calling it since he was little. His Susanoo was in the shape of a samurai, just like all Susanoo were, but instead of a regular mask, his had the face of a wolf with the rinnegan in its eyes. Instead of regular katanas for blades, his used two extremely large scythes that were each held by two hands. His had 4 arms, 2 coming out of each shoulder. One scythe held towards the ground with another held towards the sky. The one on top had a black blade with a white circle, while the one on the bottom had a white blade with a black circle. This were the blades yin and yang. This form was that of pure balance, yet it had no equal in power. A bit hypocritical, don't you think? Shit. Looks like I'll have to go all out as well, said Okami with a grin on his face as he started to change. Instead of using the same move as Naruto, he began to change into his Biju form. Once his transformation was complete, he was then Yuki's Biju form, but only slightly. He was still smaller than Naruto's Susanoo, but that didn't mean that he had no chance against him. With his 10 tails waving behind him, he began his charge towards Naruto, who also charged towards his brother. The fight that ensued would have destroyed most of the continent if fought outside of their shared mindscape. Okami was biting down on one of the arms while his tails were grabbing a hold of his other arms to keep him from using his scythes. Too bad for him, Naruto simply opened his wolf's mouth, which released a gale of wind blades charged with lightning chakra to overload the nerves and cause Okami to loosen his grip on his arms ever so slightly, but that was more than enough for Naruto, as broke free from his grip and sliced off 3 of his tails, as well as leaving a few deep cuts on Okami's body. Normally these wounds would have healed within seconds, but due to Naruto using his special chakra, Yuki, these wounds would take much longer to heal. Okami, though feeling huge amounts of pain throughout his body, jumped away from Naruto and began charging up his Bijudama just as Naruto dematerialized his swords and created a few Kamui Shuriken and launched them the moment Okami launched his Bijudama. While the shuriken absorbed a good portion of the attack, some of it still went through and damaged Naruto's Susanoo. They were both running out of energy and fast. While they may technically be gods, they only had enough chakra put together for one god, and they were both using it up like crazy. Hey, one last attack, brother. You better put your all into it, said Naruto in between pants. His only response was a grin from Okami as he began charging up his full-powered Bijudama at a pretty fast rate. Not one to be outdone, Naruto performed the hand signs to a jutsu that he could only perform while in his perfect Susanoo state. As all 6 of his hands formed the various hand signs to this jutsu, each of his arms started to be surrounded in his silver flames. Once he had completed the hand signs, he slammed his 2 scythes together to form one with a blade that continuously looked like a lava lamp of white and black coloring. The scythe also became engulfed in his silver flames. Bijudama, Mugetsu, yelled out each brother as they launched their attacks at each other. As the Bijudama closed in on Naruto's form, he slowly swung his scythe up with the blade facing up before a large straight silver wave of his Yukai rose from the ground and cut through the Bijudama and cut Okami in half. Once the wave of energy dispersed, Naruto was on the ground with his right knee touching the ground as he tried to catch his breath. His Susanoo dispersed at this point. He then got up and headed towards his brother, and saw him back into his regular form, except he was nearly cut in half with a straight jagged burnt mark going down from his head to his legs. Hey, looks like I lost. Damn, I'll miss you, brother, said Okami as the light from his eyes slowly started to fade. His body was also starting to turn into chakra, starting from his legs slowly moving up. Of course his chakra was a pure black color. Naruto could only fall to his knees and let out silent sobs at seeing the one that he truly considered family disappearing right before his eyes because of himself. Don't blame yourself, why you idiot. There was nothing YUN nor I could have done. Just promise me one thing, stated Okami as his chest was now being turned into chakra. Anything for you, brother, said Naruto as he looked straight at his brother with tears cascading down his cheeks and noticed one thing. His brother was crying. Destroy Konoha for the both of us. Make sure none of those bastards who ruined our lives go unpunished. Preferably by ripping their intestines out through their mouths. Chuckled weakly the now almost completely consumed Okami. A nod was all he received and was all he needed. He smiled and said one last thing. Goodbye, Naruto Okami. It's been fun while it lasted. With that he was gone and his chakra was now merging with Naruto. Of course Naruto didn't notice this due to his vision being completely clouded by his tears as he screamed out his anger and sadness into the air, as he cursed the world for what had happened, as he cursed himself for what he had done. A few hours later, back in Naruto's regular mindscape, as Naruto reappeared inside the regular mindscape that he and Yuki shared with a few changes to his body. He now had black patches in his hair coupled with slightly longer fangs. His eyes now holding the Juubi instead of the Rinnegan. However, the most noticeable change were the 10 tails that were silver with patches of black. His eyes were not within view since his head was down with his bangs shadowing his face. Naru-koi, I'm so sorry, said Yuki in a comforting tone as she held him in her arms and put his face into her rather impressive bust, though it was not to arouse him but rather to comfort him. She could see that what he needed right now was someone he could trust so that he could let his emotions out. And let them out he did the moment his head came into contact with her warm s. He let out all of his pent-up anger and sadness. He cursed at everything wrong in his life until he finally calmed down. He knew that Okami would not want him to be acting like a child throwing a tantrum. He would want him to move on and take their revenge on Konoha. He couldn't very well do that moping around. I'm fine. I'll be fine after a while. Besides, he's a part of me now. We're one being now. Besides, I feel like he's telling me to do something really important right now, said Naruto with a perverted grin at the end.